Welcome to Empowerment Radio. My name is Dr. Friedemann, and I'm so glad that you decided to join me. Empowerment Radio is about giving you the insights, tools, and solutions to address some of the most challenging aspects of our daily lives. So sit back, relax, and empower yourself.
Well, welcome to Empowerment Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Friedemann, and the title of the show would have been The Courage to Change Everything. But in the light of the recent events, I think a more fitting title would be The Courage When Everything Changes. And we are definitely in a situation where everything has changed. Obviously, we are all dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and the fallout that is multifaceted. A lot of people are worried about getting sick or their loved ones getting sick, but a lot of people are also worried, especially the people I've been talking with, about the economic fallout. How do we rebuild this all? What's going to happen to us? Will we all just be destitute, and what happens next? And so whenever we are facing these uncertainties and a lot of senses of being out of control, one of the go-to places is anxiety, worry, trying to scramble around and somehow getting more and more stressed out. And the more we do that, the less and less powerful we feel. And the more we are feeling like this is bigger than we can't really deal with that. Now, when you really look back at your life, you probably know that there were circumstances where you had been facing challenges yourself. Not necessarily global challenges, but challenges where you would say that was tough. Maybe it was starting already in your childhood when you were dealing with an abusive parent or just an unstable and neglectful household where you didn't get really any guidance. Or maybe you had to deal with your own challenges, mental, emotional, physical, or maybe you had an addiction that you were battling. Maybe you had a job loss or a loss of someone you really loved. Or maybe you started a business and it didn't work out, or you put yourself out there with an idea, or maybe just hoping to find love, and you found one rejection after another facing you. How did you overcome those challenges? How did you find the courage to keep on going, to not give up, to have that desire to eventually get what you want? Now, I do believe that we all have enormous resources inside of us, but somehow we forget that they're there, and so we forget to access them and utilize them. And so we can, just at this time where we are all asked to be our best, maybe take a little inventory. Maybe just think about, what did I do in the past that helped me to overcome my obstacles, or make some big changes happening, or deal with that curveball that life threw me? What did I do that allowed me to keep on going and eventually succeed? Maybe when you look back, you can find there is resilience, or you can find that there is an enormous creativity that you have. Maybe you're just really good in planning one step at a time, or asking for help. Maybe you have a very strong inner guidance and intuition that gets you. But without the courage to move forward, you probably would have given up at some point. And this is why this show today is about the courage that we all need right now. And the courage not to get through this time and go back just to where we were before the virus brought up this pandemic, but really the courage to make changes individually and globally based on what we are experiencing right now. Because I do believe this is not just a disaster. This is also an opportunity here. This is an opportunity to make something really better individually and globally in this world. And here is a quote from my guest today that I really find so fitting. He could have just written it yesterday. And it basically comes from his new book, which is The Courage to Change Everything. And it says a few questions for you. Are you ready to increase your awareness, evolve yourself, and do what it takes to bring out your courage? Will you commit to stepping outside of your comfort zone, even if you just a little bit at first? Are you ready to allow yourself to live from your highest values, increasing your wisdom and bringing forth your unique gifts, talents, and brilliance in ever more significant ways? Will you do whatever it takes to become a master of your mind and heart, and therefore of yourself? I think these are very, very fitting questions for us right now at this time. And so I'm really excited and glad to have my guest, Ken Foster, award-winning and best-selling author and coach for individuals and businesses and so many more things, syndicated radio show host. I welcome you, Ken, on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Friedemann, thank you so much for having me this morning. I think the time is right for us to step into the courage that we need. So I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, you are an expert on courage, and I definitely will dive more into this topic of courage because it's a really interesting topic, and I think something we often just ignore in our lives, that we do actually all have that courage. I always think about just popping out of the womb took a lot of courage because it was certainly cozy there in the comfort zone of the mother's belly. But you know, courage is a natural ability we have. But before we go to courage, what are you telling your friends and loved ones right now that are reeling with anxiety in this situation? They probably knock at your door and ask, so Ken, what can you do? Can you give us a little bit of hope or wisdom right now?
Well, right now in this time, there's a lot of fear going on. In fact, I would say it's almost a fear pandemic along with the virus. So what I like to share with my friends and my clients is that, you know, first of all, this will pass. This is not something that's going to be with us forever. It will pass. It will get better. But during this time, it's really important to stay fearless, to stay in our courage. And, you know, we do that one day at a time. We do that. I was thinking, you know, where was I at 9/11 when 9/11 hit? And I thought to myself, you know, when I was at 9/11, I was about $3.5 million in debt. Both of my businesses had shut down, and I didn't know what to do financially. But I did know what to do with my mind, because I knew that if I stayed in a place of calmness, that I would make really good choices. And I knew that if I surrounded myself with individuals that were also wise, had wisdom in them. And what I did was I decided to become a smile millionaire, as one of the philosophers and spiritual teachers, Paramahansa Yogananda, would say, a smile millionaire. So I started putting a smile on my face. I started to go to grocery stores and put smiles on cashier's face. I started just to feel within myself that everything's going to be okay. And I wanted to, you know, I could have lived from a place of fear and worry and stress, but I also knew that if I were to go into stress, that, you know, stress releases cortisol and adrenaline and glycogen in the system, which lowers the immune system. And I thought, you know, I want to keep my immune system high. So that's what I did. So I started every morning, I would wake up, and I still do this to this day. I wake up, and when my eyes open, I go to gratitude. I think about what I'm grateful for. After that, I take some time to energize my body. I'll meditate, I'll pray, but I start my day every day in a place where my mind is focused on success, on happy thoughts, on understanding that today is going to be an amazing day, every day. Which is, by the way, we'll get to the book later, but that's one of the reasons that I wrote this book, because it came out of that place where knowing that if we use our minds properly during this time and not go into fear and worry and concern and stress, we're going to be so much more better. Why? Because when we're in a high state of consciousness, when we're in a place of creativity, everything starts to open up, and we start to we start to get filled. In fact, even that right now, today, I'm just filled with all these ideas of how to grow my business, how to support people, how to become a better person myself. So that's kind of what I do. That's what I suggest.
Great suggestions. And I feel that's really important to see that gratitude, even though maybe a lot of things are right now uncertain or not there anymore. A lot of people have lost their jobs.
Right.
Some people have lost their loved ones. Some people are still struggling with their health. Some people don't really know how to pay the bills. And there's still the opportunity to have gratitude, and there's still the opportunity to have hope. And I do feel also, that we cannot beat ourselves up for being anxious. We have to have a little compassion for this natural response that a part of us has that says, oh my God, but, and that's a question to you, Ken, the reality is, which is a typical anxiety producing thought. The reality is ... And then there come all the bad things that you can think of and all the what ifs that basically create a horror scenario. What do you suggest about this? The reality is thinking that so many people are opening up as a trap to fall into.
Well, it's definitely a trap to fall into. And I think if you start to spin down that, remember what you focus on, you feel. So if you're focusing on, quote, reality of, yeah, I can't pay the bills, my friends are getting sick, I might get sick. If you're focusing on that, what's really going to happen is you're going to start to feel disempowered. You're going to start to feel anxious. You're going to start to feel maybe angry or sad or lonely. So it's really important to understand during these times, the mind is the cause of our bondage and the mind is the cause of our liberation. And what I mean by that is just that when what you're focusing on will expand. And what do we want to expand? Do we want to expand our courage? Do we want to expand our creativity? Do we want to expand our compassion and understanding for ourselves, as you mentioned, Friedemann, and others during this crisis? When we start to expand on those states of mind, what happens is in our brain is releasing oxytocin, it's releasing endorphins, it's releasing dopamine into our bodies, and we're starting to feel good. We're starting to feel better. We're starting to be in a place where, wow, okay, I can make through today. I ask everybody a question in my book. One of the questions, there's a lot of questions in there, but one I like to focus on is, if I was courageous, what would I do now? If I was courageous, what would I do now? So you can't be in fear and courage at the same time, okay? So if you're in fear, you might want to ask that on a consistent basis. Today, if I was courageous, what would I do today? And maybe it's just taking care of yourself and nurturing yourself. Or maybe it's reaching out to a friend and talking to them and seeing how they're doing. Or maybe for some of you that are leaders, it's a place of, wow, why don't I put a group together, a support group, and we can meet, every Monday at 10 or whatever, and support each other through these times. I've always found this, and through 9/11, by the way, within 2 years, I was whole. I had, remember I said I was $3.5 million in debt. I was completely out of debt. I had negotiated payoffs and settlements of everything. I didn't have to bankrupt. So I went through that with a state of grace. And when I would talk to the creditors, again, my thought was to put a smile on their face. So, when we do that, people respond to us differently. But if we're in a state of anger, fear, worry, they feel that also, and they'll respond in like kind. So if you're in a place where right now you're wondering where your next paycheck's going to come, you're wondering if you're going to get sick or not, you know what? We can't predict that future, right? But what we can do is take care of ourselves in this moment. And in this moment, what can you do? What courageous acts can you do so that you feel great today?
And I think, what you just said is so true, especially with connecting to others in ways that doesn't project our fears and our maybe even frustrations onto them, but really more like an openness and a sense of, I'm also a human being who has a heart and has needs. And just ask for a favor, or wants you to understand. And that's something I notice here more and more in these times, and I so pray that this doesn't go away, that people are not responding in selfish acts. Yes, maybe there are some little fights in the toilet paper aisle, but in general, people are really kind and compassionate and understanding and trying to help each other. That is just a wonderful way human mankind really has been showing up. And whether it's the Italian singing on the balconies or these little parties on Skype, there are a lot of ways people try to stay connected with the heart and not through the fear. But you brought up courage. What is courage? Now, when I think about courage, and a lot of people would think about it as face your fears, push yourself, get out of this comfort zone, jump out of this plane. But is it really what courage is all about?
Well, the definition of courage comes from the Latin word cur, which means to speak one's heart. And a lot of people, we, of course, like you said earlier in the show, everybody's born with courage, but courage for most people is undeveloped, and we have to develop our courage. Courage, by the way, is a feeling. We can feel courage. So do you know what fear feels like, right? Everybody knows
Sure.
what fear feels like. All of a sudden your mind kind of gets dim. You're not thinking as clearly. You might feel a stress in your heart. You might feel your body constricting. So everybody kind of knows what fear feels like, but courage has a feeling too. And courage, when you feel courage, you feel empowered. You feel light. You feel your mind comes alive. It starts to open up. It starts to move in directions. And as soon, so courage is also, it's a bridge. It's a bridge from fear to faith. It's a bridge from lack and limitations to abundance and joy and love. It's the bridge. So courage can take you in places you've never been before, right? So I'm not talking about the courage to jump off a bridge with a bungee cord or run into a burning building. Of course, those things take courage, but that's not the kind of courage we're talking about here. We're talking about the courage to develop you, the you that's in there, that's going through, that's observing what's happening in the world right now. It's like that brilliance, that genius, that amazing being that's within you is really waiting for you to tune in and bring that out in a much greater way. So we're all being called to courage right now. Courage to transform our thinking for some of us, courage to step up and maybe do things we've never done, maybe communicate with people or ask for things we've never asked for, maybe be there for homeless people that you've never done before, maybe give of yourself in different ways. We're being called to change inside of us. All of us are. There's no coincidence this is happening right now in the world. It didn't just happen. It's there for a reason. And of course, everybody has to find their own reason for them to be able to step into that inner greatness that we all have in us. There's three levels of mind. There's superconscious, conscious, and subconscious mind. Most people are walking around looking at what's happening right now. And, if they're focused on the outside consistently, turning on the TV, listening to their neighbors, reading something about the coronavirus, they're outward focused. And what this is calling us all to do is to be more inward focused, to slow down to succeed, to take some time to maybe journal, maybe meditate, maybe nurture yourself, take a bath, maybe go for a walk by yourself, practice social distancing. For some people, that is courage, to practice social distancing. They're so used to touching and feeling and being with others that they can't even distance themselves.
Yeah.
So we're all being called to step into ourselves in a greater way. The question is, at the end of this, and it will end, who will you have become at the end of this? how will you have shown up? Will you show up every day worried and fearful and spreading gossip and rumors and being on the internet and and seeing the next let's see, what are they, conspiracy theory of why this happened? Or will you just step into your own power, your own purpose, and start to look at life from the eyes of your soul and start to think, well, you know what? I can overcome this. This is going to be okay. Maybe I'm going to tune into my creativity and create something out of this that I've never had in my life before. That's how we're going to get through this.
I'm so glad that you redefine courage, because I feel it takes so much courage to what you just said. Sometimes to reach out to others when we have been so focused on career or our own goals and haven't really opened up. It takes so much courage to face yourself. You're absolutely right. Just sitting there and not running around, not being overly busy, not just being on a tight agenda and never having room to breathe. Just sitting and facing your thoughts, even facing your fears. Facing fears is always interesting because people often understand facing fears as you see your fear, you're just give it the nose, and then you are basically doing the opposite. But what I find is more courageous is facing the fears, sitting with it, listening to it, being aware of it, and trying to understand it, trying to have some compassion for it. So yeah, it takes definitely a lot of courage right now to go through this and find yourself ultimately.
Friedemann, I had a fellow on my show here a while back, and he was the stuntman for Tom Hanks. And he was the first Tom Hanks. He'd been in several Tom Hanks movies, being his.
I didn't know that Tom Hanks needs stuntmen.
Tom Hanks. Well, for instance, when he was playing Sully.
Okay, I can.
Right? Yeah. So anyway, he was in that. He was doing the stunts for Tom, and we talked about fear, and he said to me, he said, well, as a stuntman, there's a lot of things that could come up that I'm afraid of. And I said, so how do you use fear? He says, well, picture it this way. When I'm called to go up into, let's say, a hot air balloon, and I go up about 3,000 feet in a hot air balloon, I jump out on a bungee cord, I cut the bungee cord, and I free fall till about 500 feet from the ground. I pull a chute and I land. He said at each one of those, going up in the balloon, there's fear. There's fear around jumping out of the balloon. There's fear when I cut the cord. There's fear when I pull the chute to land. There's fear. He says, but I use fear on every step of the way to mitigate what could possibly go wrong. And he said, once I use fear to mitigate what could go wrong, he says, then I create a plan. And then I resolve that. So I think we can all, if we have fear in our life, fear's there, it's a wonderful emotion to notice what's going on. And I always like to ask my clients this. I've been a business strategist and a life coach for 24 years. So one of the things I ask them is, what would the person have to believe to be this fearful or to be into fear? So again, it's an introspective, reflective question, which is where we want to be right now. We want to notice our mind. We want to notice what we focus on. I have a theory. I haven't proved it yet. Maybe the science has already, but what I've noticed is that thought is not individual. Thought is universal. And so if I were to take a person that is, let's say, has a fearophobia in the United States, and I went and I was able to write down all their thoughts, what their predominant thoughts are. And I went to another country, Japan or China or South Korea, and I found another person with that exact same phobia. What I believe is true is that those thoughts will be predominantly about the same. So why is that? See, I believe we're tapping into this universal database that we're not necessarily conscious of, but we're all tapping into it. So if you have a fear, if you're focused on that, it's really good to resolve that, whatever this is. And there's a lot of fear going on right now in the media, okay? There's a whole bunch. But that doesn't mean it has to be your fear. But you can ask yourself, wow, if I'm afraid of this, what can I do to resolve this? Or if I had courage, what are the 3 steps I could take today to overcome that fear? Those kind of questions that get you in a great state of mind.
I think it's very interesting. I mean, science certainly showed that we can smell fear of others, and that just, that subconscious awareness is creating fear in ourselves. But, going further into quantum physics, I can very much imagine that this goes into entanglements and string theories and so on. So there is an interconnectedness that we are not fully aware of. So if you resolve your fears, and I always feel like we have to heal and outgrow our fears, then we do is actually maybe for human mankind or for all these other people who have similar fears in the meantime. Now, what I'm wondering about is you mentioned also there is the wisdom of self in your book. And it's, by the way, the book is fabulous. It's like a daily companion, and it's the courage to change everything. It's a daily companion where you go through, you have every day a contemplation, a topic. Every day there is an action step to take. And I'm going to talk more about things that I want to know about the book. But what is that wisdom self that you describe in this book?
So the wisdom self, there's a lot of names for it. Universal consciousness, the superconscious mind, the mind of, Albert Einstein said, all I want to know is the thoughts of God. Everything else are details. It's a higher level of consciousness that we tap into. We all have it. We have the ability to do it. Many of us have experienced maybe a gut feeling of, I need to go this way instead of that way. I need to turn left instead of right. So there's an intuitive part of ourselves, a gut feeling. Most of us have an undeveloped, not only courage, but undeveloped intuition. Intuition, that gut feeling of which way to go, what to do. That
Well, is it undeveloped, or we're not paying attention to it?
Well, yeah, either way. I would say undeveloped, though, because I think an undeveloped mind, because once we can let go of our fears, of our phobias, of our disempowering thinking, and start to really nurture ourselves, and become quiet and still, and learn how to still our mind, we can hear it. We can hear the intuition.
Exactly.
We all have it, but we have to develop it. We definitely do. But anyway, so once we get there, we start to make really good choices, and those choices lead to a rich life. Now, does that mean we're not going to have troubles and struggles and go through the next virus 10 years from now or whatever it's going to be? We are, but when we go through it in peace, in calmness, worry-free, truly worry-free, life is pretty good. It's not this, the world's going to collapse and I'm going to die tomorrow. It's like, wow, how interesting this is happening today. Who can I support? Where can I serve? How can I share my gifts, talents, and abilities? We start asking questions like that, life gets pretty good.
Well, when we come back, we'll talk more about intuition, wisdom, self, courage, doubts, and disbeliefs, and how can we make the very, very best selves out of this situation. Hi, Dr. Friedemann here. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. If you're interested in learning more about fear and anxiety, here you'll find guided meditations, webinars, and interviews with some of the most renowned experts in the field of empowerment. Delve into the over 230 videos and more to come every week.